What happened here?
She accused me of stealing her bracelet. I didn't take anything.
I never thought we'd be treated like this.
Don't twist this around.
Then tell me.
The slap. A wine glass shatters. A wealthy older woman's voice dripping with contempt. Then freeze the moment and pull back into narration. That was the day I learned my mother's job title could never protect me from her cruelty, but it would take 6 months for her to learn who I really was. If they love stories about quiet strength turning into loud justice, hit subscribe now because the ending will hit hard. My name is Odessa Vance, and before I tell you what happened that night, I need you to understand who I was before it. I was 24 years old, tired in the way only people juggling 2 jobs and a master's degree understand, and prouder than anyone had a right to be of my mother. Her name was Delphine Okafor, and for 11 years she had been the housekeeper for one of the wealthiest families in the city, the Ashgroves. People heard her job title and made assumptions about her. What they never saw was the woman who raised me alone, who worked double shifts so I could finish school, who never once complained, even when her back ached and her hands cracked from years of labor that other people barely noticed. I grew up half in our small apartment and half in the shadow of that enormous house, watching my mother move through rooms bigger than anything I'd ever call home. I learned early to be careful there, polite, small, grateful, even when gratitude wasn't really what was being asked of me. I told myself it didn't matter, that dignity wasn't something anyone could take from you if you didn't hand it over. Griffin Ashgrove, the man who would one day inherit everything, was different from what I expected. He wasn't cold like the house around him. I remember the first real conversation we had, small and unplanned, when I fixed a broken cufflink for him before some meeting he was late for. He looked at me the way people rarely did in that house, like a person and not part of the furniture. It was nothing, really, a few minutes, but I carried it with me longer than I should have. His mother, Constance, noticed everything, and she noticed that too. I felt it before she said a word, that particular chill some people carry, the kind that makes a room colder just by them walking into it. When she finally spoke to me directly, it wasn't kind. Something about the help's children forgetting where they belonged. I smiled, said nothing, and told myself it was just words. I didn't know yet how wrong I was. I didn't know that smile would cost me everything I thought I understood about my place in that house, and that the woman standing in front of me was only just getting started.
It started with a favor, or at least that's how Constance framed it. One of the event staff had called in sick before a gala the Ashgroves were hosting, and that I was asked to fill in. I said yes because my mother asked me to, and because some small part of me still wanted to prove I could carry myself well in that world, even for one night. I should have known better. Constance treated me differently the moment guests started arriving. In private, she was cold. In public, she became something sharper. She gave me instructions that didn't make sense, timing that couldn't be met, small, impossible tasks dressed up as ordinary ones. I understood what she was doing before I could even name it. She wanted me to fail, and she wanted an audience for it. I held my composure because I had to. I smiled when I wanted to snap. I apologized for things that weren't my fault. Inside, something was building, a kind of quiet anger I hadn't let myself feel before, the kind that comes from being tested by someone who already decided you'd lose. Somewhere in the middle of that long, exhausting night, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. In a hallway away from the music and the noise, I found Thaddeus, Constance's golden nephew, the one she was grooming to inherit alongside Griffin, wrapped up with Soline, Griffin's fiancé, in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. I stood frozen for a second too long before backing away. It wasn't my business. It wasn't my fight. I told myself that walking away was the safest thing I could do. And maybe it was, but some part of me knew I'd just stepped into something much bigger than a night of serving drinks. I thought that was the worst of it, that I could survive the rest of the evening on caution and silence. I was wrong. Near the end of the night, Constance found me by the kitchen, her voice low and sharp, accusing me of taking a bracelet that had simply gone missing. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even seen it. But the accusation wasn't really about a bracelet. It was about power, about reminding me exactly where I believed I belonged. I felt the ground shift beneath me, and I didn't yet understand how far I was about to fall. Constance didn't wait for a quiet moment. She wanted witnesses. She raised her voice right there near the kitchen, loud enough to pull guests away from the music, loud enough that conversations stopped mid-sentence. She said I had stolen from her, that people like me always did eventually, that it was only a matter of time. I stood there stunned, trying to find words that wouldn't come. Then she called my mother into the room. I will never forget my mother's face in that moment. 11 years of loyalty, 11 years of showing up early and staying late, and she was being summoned like a servant, called in to discipline her own child in front of strangers. My mother tried to speak calmly, tried to defend me with the same quiet dignity she'd carried through every hard year of her life. Constance didn't want calm. She wanted a performance, and my mother's composure only seemed to make her angrier. That's when it happened. Constance's hand moved before I could even process what was coming, and the slap landed across my face with a sound that seemed to swallow the entire room. The music had already stopped. Someone gasped. I remember the sting first, sharp and immediate, and then the silence that followed, heavier than anything I'd ever felt. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but something else took over instead, something colder and steadier. In that moment, I wasn't just my mother's daughter or someone's household help. I was every person who had ever been told to make themselves smaller to keep the peace, and I was done doing that. I caught a glimpse of a phone raised somewhere in the crowd, quietly recording, though I didn't think much of it then. My hand instinctively went to my cheek, still burning, my eyes locked on Constance, who looked almost satisfied, as if she'd finally proven something she'd believed all along. Then I heard footsteps behind me, familiar ones, and the room shifted again. Griffin had walked in, and from the look on his face, he'd seen enough to understand exactly what had just happened. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. For the first time that night, Constance looked uncertain, and I realized the story she thought she controlled was about to change completely. Griffin didn't raise his voice, but the room went stiller than it had all night. He asked one simple question: what happened here? Nobody rushed to answer, but nobody looked away either. Guests who had been silent moments ago suddenly found their courage, describing what they'd witnessed. Even Thaddeus, pale and unable to meet his aunt's eyes, said nothing to defend her. His silence louder than any words could have been. Griffin turned to the missing bracelet first, since that's the accusation that started everything. Within minutes, one of the staff members admitted she'd seen Constance placing something in her own drawer earlier that evening before she ever accused me of taking it. The room absorbed that slowly, the weight of it settling over every guest still standing there. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I'd been holding on to more than my composure that night. Weeks earlier, uneasy about things I'd noticed in the family's finances during a project for school, I'd recorded a conversation almost by instinct, a habit from research, nothing more. I hadn't meant to use it like this. But standing there, with my cheek still burning, I handed my phone to Griffin and let the truth speak for itself. The recording confirmed what I'd seen in the hallway, and it exposed something else, too: financial discrepancies Thaddeus had been quietly hiding from the family trust. Griffin's expression changed as he listened, disbelief giving way to something harder, something final. He looked at Thaddeus, then at Celine, who couldn't hold his gaze, and the engagement everyone had celebrated only months earlier, ended right there, without ceremony, without softness. Then he turned to his mother. I watched a lifetime of quiet resentment finally surface in his voice, calm but unshakable. He told her that everything she believed about people like me and my mother had blinded her to the people actually betraying this family from the inside. He stripped her of her role within the company without hesitation and gave her a choice: apologize or leave the home she'd spent decades treating like her personal kingdom. For the first time that night, Constance had nothing to say, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt the ground beneath me steady again. Constance apologized eventually, though it came out stiff and hollow, the kind of apology forced out by circumstance rather than conscience. She said the words in front of the same guests who'd watched her slap me only an hour earlier, and I could see how much it cost her. Not the guilt, but the humiliation of being seen so clearly by people she'd spent her whole life trying to impress. I accepted it, not because I forgave her in that moment, but because my mother taught me that grace isn't about the other person deserving it, it's about not letting someone else's cruelty decide who you become. The months that followed moved differently than I expected. Griffin restructured leadership within the company, and this time when my name came up, it wasn't as a favor or an act of charity. It was because I'd proven, without meaning to, that I understood things about that family's finances that people twice my age had missed. I became legal counsel, earning my place the same way my mother always had, through work no one could dismiss.
My mother's role changed too. She was offered a position within the family's charitable foundation. Real trust, real respect, the kind that should have been there all along. Watching her walk through that house now, not as someone's help, but as someone whose voice mattered, undid something tight in my chest that had been there for years. Constance stayed, technically, but the house was different around her. I saw her once from across a hallway. The same hallway where everything had unraveled, standing slightly apart from a conversation she used to control effortlessly. She looked smaller somehow, not because anyone had taken anything physical from her, but because the power she'd built on other people's silence had finally run out. I didn't need her to suffer to feel like justice had been done. I just needed the truth to finally matter more than her comfort. And it did. Standing in that mansion months later, my mother beside me, neither of us there because someone allowed it, but because we'd earned it, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped the night of that slap. Some people spend their whole lives mistaking cruelty for power, but real power was never something Constance had to give us. We'd carried it all along. Cruelty dressed in wealth is still cruelty, and dignity, the kind you can't buy, always outlasts it. My mother taught me that respect isn't given by title or money. It's earned by how you treat people who can't fight back. That day, someone finally saw us, but we always saw ourselves.